But it is now time for our press preview with all those front pages. Joining us tonight, journalist and broadcaster Nabila Ramdani, and also business entrepreneur John Smith. Welcome to you again.
Hi.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Front pages as ever, first starting with the Daily Mail, which says 9 in 10 care homes are failing to provide proper treatment for their patients, particularly over dementia, according to a new report. Same lead story for the Daily Express, which says some dementia patients suffered a staggering betrayal by their carers. Senior Conservatives reportedly telling The Times that reorganising the NHS, Andrew Lansley's reforms, has been the government's biggest mistake. Well, The Guardian says tomorrow's 4-hour NHS strike in England will disrupt ambulance services and some maternity care. The paper pictures Alan Henning's widow, Barbara, at that memorial service tonight in Manchester. The Independent also has a similar photo from the service. Its lead story, news that David Cameron is planning powers to remove governors and head teachers in failing schools if the Conservatives win the next election. Its sister paper, The Eye, saying that new officials appointed by the government will be able to take control of those underperforming schools. Writing in the Daily Telegraph, Mayor of London Boris Johnson says quotas for European immigrants should be considered to help win Conservative votes back from UKIP. While the Metro reports UKIP leader Nigel Farage is calling for a referendum next year on Britain remaining in the European Union. The Mirror adds that a commitment on an immediate referendum could lead to an alliance between UKIP and the Conservatives after next year's general election. And the Daily Star has another story about the X Factor, which is not featuring in our selection, again, one has to say. What is featuring with Nabila and John is The Times. And we ought to mention first that rather splendid photograph there. As I say, play misty for me. Dog walker out with her pets as the mist rolls off the hills at Ewley Berry. I hope that's the way you pronounce it. An Iron Age fort in Gloucestershire. Sign of the changing seasons, and rather wonderful it is, although the old trees are still quite green behind. Anyway, below that, unhappy reading for many within the NHS who complained about government reforms. Now the Tories themselves are accepting that Andrew Lansley's reforms perhaps went a bit too far.
Well, I'm a little bit cynical here because it obviously hasn't worked. And I think possibly some of the dirty laundry is coming out now rather than nearer the election. I think the Tories' potential Achilles heel sits at the NHS, and I think Miliband and Labour's Achilles heel potentially sits in migrants. And in one of our stories coming forward in the next 10 minutes or so, sitting alongside it, and we didn't particularly pick it, but sitting alongside it is Miliband, I'll get tough on migrants. Now, you know, that doesn't sit or chime with his and the party's view over the last so many years.
Right.
So I think they're trying to get the laundry out there.
So the strategy is admit to the failings before
Correct.
Labour start accusing us of getting it wrong.
Well, and in that respect, it's a very important story because it's, of course, of huge concern. And the Times has manifestly got its hand on a very serious investigation there, revealing that at least £5 billion have been wasted every year on inefficiencies. And, you know, the NHS could well be, at the next election, it could be the issue that the election will revolve around, actually.
Well, we've got the strike tomorrow, of course, with the staff complaining about their pay and conditions. And certainly the quote here from a Downing Street official is that there was a huge strategic error in terms of these reforms.
Yes,
this is with Andrew Lansley, wasn't it?
And it's a hugely damaging story because, of course, every party wants to be the party of the NHS.
Yes.
And traditionally it has always been viewed as more, linked to the Labour Party. But David Cameron made it very clear that he had a personal attachment to the NHS, not least of all because his late son had been provided great care, at the hands of the NHS.
Yes, it's a very impassioned personal speech he made at the party conference, wasn't it?
Very much so.
I think he was genuine about that as well. And I think, look, it is a top-heavy beast. In one of my previous existences, I was on the Board of Governors at the Institute of Child Health, which is basically Great Ormond Street Hospital. And the amount of administrators there were in the NHS system that I saw against carers was a disproportionate amount at that time and has grown worse since. So it is one of those, if you were in charge of the NHS and it was a private company, you'd say, chaps, we're going to revamp this. Now, to do that politically
like
nigh
turning an
on
oil
impossible.
tanker that's been described.
But I will say, however passionate you want to seem to appear about the NHS, what people will look at in the end is the party's record in relation to the NHS.
Yeah.
OK, let's go to the front of the Daily Mirror. UKIP back in the headlines, with Nigel Farage still smiling, although it says he's slippery there for some particular reason. Nigel Farage yesterday admitted he would prop up a Tory government in exchange for a European vote. Now, we were getting the suggestion, I think even in this morning's newspapers, there would be no deal ahead of the election. But what's being suggested here, that something might happen after the election?
I can't believe there's going to be a number of discussions about deals in the next 7 months, because the permutations are quite amazing. I mean, there are, we talked about this before the break, you know, potentially up in Scotland there could be a broad sweep by the SNP, which will affect Labour. UKIP, they'll take votes, no question, from the Tories and some from Labour too, but will they get seats? We don't know. There's going to have to be deals.
The suggestion here is that there would be a coalition, the price is a referendum, but the Tories already...
They've already given that.
Yeah, so I don't quite see what the barriers would be in that case.
Yes, indeed, but I think that, you know, many people feel that UKIP is the right wing, is a party of the right-wing Conservatives, if you like, and in that respect, that kind of pact, it doesn't come as much of a surprise. That doesn't mean that UKIP is not interested in Labour voters, but traditionally it's closer to the Conservative Party, and what Farage would be interested in doing would effectively amount to a coalition with the Conservatives.
The problem is that, of course, they've set out their stall as being apart from the other parties. This is why perhaps they've attracted the protest vote. So if they are being seen that close to the Conservatives, could that be actually damaging to them come the general election?
I think they'd have to be careful how they position themselves, but come the general election, I could see UKIP, I mean, taking on board what you've just said, in fact, I could see UKIP and the DUP and the Conservatives getting together, and those numbers potentially make sense, because that is a centre-right coalition. I can see that, and that does make sense for Cameron, I think.
But there's also a sense that as people get, you know, angry about a lot of issues and bad governance over lots of things, that UKIP goes from a party that, you know, people go to let off steam, as it were. But also Farage, I think, realises that he might hold the balance of power there, and he might become the kingmaker at the next election.
Yeah, well, there's more on that page 7 of the Express. Farage will join forces with Tories in return for an in-out EU vote next year. So they're still making Europe their main platform. But, of course, the other question about UKIP that people have been raising is, what are the other policies? You know, what sets them apart from the Tories on the economy, on the NHS?
You're right, Mark. That's what we were saying before the break, isn't it? That, you know, potentially there is Farage and the charm offensive, but what actually sits in the ethos is below that.
Right. Another inside page of the Express you've gone for here, which is page 4. It is British troops in Iraq helping Kurds to battle IS. Now, the Ministry of Defence has acknowledged that, but they made it very plain it's just in a training role, particularly for the use of heavy machine guns. But parallel being drawn with Vietnam, of course, US advisors started and then the troops had to go in. Could it be the start of a process of more militarisation there?
Well, I mean, the government is making it clear for the moment that it is a support role. It's, you know, in order to help the Kurds effectively defeat ISIS, especially when it comes to the use of heavy weaponry. Their role is, for now, limited as trainers, as advisors on the ground, but there's always the risk of mission creep, of course. But the idea behind that kind of help is that airstrikes from the US, but also the UK, are proving to be quite ineffective in defeating ISIS.
Yeah, and they've got a picture there of this airstrike on Kobani with a claim that it's halted the IS advance for the moment. But is this actually a sort of fulcrum point? I think we've got some footage that was filmed today coming up. If Kobani does actually fall, will there then have to be a reassessment about the military operations, i.e. the airstrikes are not going to stop the Islamic State?
I'm rather worried about Turkey's role here. I think Turkey's talking out of both sides of her mouth at the moment. I think she's saying all the right things to her NATO partners, but I have
because of the Kurdish problem.
I have a horrible fear, because of the Kurdish issue, that there is a supply line between them and ISIL, and that worries me.
Well, millions of pounds are being spent in, you know, firing at essentially, so far, pickup trucks
Yeah.
and,
Small
and
armoured
mortars
vehicles.
being destroyed. So, clearly the strikes are not proving to be effective.
And it's
I-
expensive warfare to do
It
that,
is
isn't
extremely
it?
expensive, and I think, of course, Britain has been involved in cataclysmic wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I don't think there's
No appetite for that
no
repeated,
appetite
yeah.
amongst British public opinion to get drawn in again.
It's such a
and
big
not
story,
least
though,
of
isn't
all
it? There-
because violence breeds more violence.
And there are so many participants in this now, so many groupings, so many countries on both sides of the.
Yeah.
Of the
It's
And we
becoming a war
should,
by proxy.
I think we should just
becoming
mention
very
in
difficult
passing
to
as well, the
analyse.
front pages have got, the human cost of all the problems with, remember Alan Henning, of course,
How
known
sad
as
does she
Barbara
look? I mean,
Henning, yeah. But just to
your heart
make
has
plain,
go out
she was
to her.
anxious, perhaps is not the right word, but she was determined for the press and the cameras to be there to see this particular service tonight in Manchester, because it was at this Islamic Centre in Manchester, and clearly the courage being shown by all the family there to remember her husband, their dad, should be applauded, I think, by many people.
Absolutely. My heart and all our hearts should go out to that family and to the other families too.
Yeah, indeed. With this John Cantley video being released, of course, and we'll see what emerges there. Well, look, coming up in the next half, the autumnal childhood past that time elevated to its own tournament. Sounds like another crossword clue, that one. I'm even interested in that. More in a moment.